Hi, my name is Charlie Meadows. Welcome to the February 25th, 2026 broadcast of the podcast called The ABCs of Politics and Culture. On my far right over here is co-host Aya Kelly. Next to her is co-host Bob Donahue. And between Bob and I is Ron McWhorter, is the original founder of the Oklahoma Constitution newspaper, and we're going to be talking with Ron about that today. I will just say this, that this is one of the most important features that we have in the state of Oklahoma.
By far.
For political purposes and such, there's probably not another state in the union. We've encouraged people to do something like Ron and his current partner Steve do, and it's just become invaluable, particularly the conservative index. I can tell you right now we have a state representative that lives in and represents part of Logan County. Her name is Molly Jenkins, and she ran for office last year, and her entire campaign it was a comparison between what she would do and what the incumbent did based on his votes in the Oklahoma Constitution conservative index. That's the summer issue, your quarterly paper, and the summer issue is the only thing in the state of Oklahoma that ranks our legislature on a liberal and conservative basis. They've been doing it since 1979. And there are many others that have made efforts to do something like this, and they might last 3 or 4 years or 5 or something to that nature, and they fade away. But not Ron and his partner Steve. They have been here for a long time. So Ron, with that in mind, unless you two have something you want to say, let's let him kick it off and start telling us, why did you create this paper, and what was your original vision, and just tell us something about it.
Well, the Oklahoma Constitution newspaper was conceived in November of 1978. I just finished my third losing campaign for the Oklahoma House of Representatives, and it was a majority Democrat district.
Hang on a second, Ron. Back then, almost every district was majority Democrat in the state of Oklahoma.
And unlike today, where both houses of the Oklahoma legislature are dominated by Republicans, back at that time, it was exactly opposite. And, and so Republicans were a extreme minority in the legislature.
Yes.
And we had a hard time finding candidates to run. And so, I was one of those candidates that went out there, and just so people would have a chance to vote for somebody else.
Let me address something here, because everybody thinks that Oklahoma is this bright red state, not knowing that the only time Republicans controlled the House was in 1920 and 21. Statehood is 1907, and then we gained control again in 2004. In the Senate, we didn't gain control until 2008. That's 101 years after statehood. And the registration used to be probably 4 or 5 to 1 Democrat over Republican in the state of Oklahoma. My, how things have changed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead, Ron.
And so, as I say, I lost my third campaign, and during the campaign, there were 3 other young conservatives. They had helped me on my campaign. They worked on a lot of other campaigns, and we met on a regular basis, all-night restaurant, have coffee, and talk about the campaigns. And so a week or two after the November 1978 election, it was our first meeting following the election, and we were kind of licking our wounds and trying to figure out, where to go in the future. I decided that, it was useless for me to run a 4th time, and so I wanted to direct my efforts in another direction. And so as we talked about things, we came up with one of the problems that we experienced was Frosty Troy and his Oklahoma Observer newspaper. And for those today that don't know about Frosty, and Frosty died a decade or so ago, and I'm not even sure if there's an Oklahoma Observer publication.
I don't think there is now.
I think it ceased, after he died. But just a little bit about Frosty. He was an entertaining speaker. In fact, that's where most of his financial income came from, because newspaper business, particularly today, is not a lucrative thing.
Yes.
But he made money speaking, and he was a very entertaining speaker. And he was a frequent speaker, paid speaker at local affiliates of the Oklahoma Education Association.
Union events.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And organizations and so on. And I say he was a entertaining speaker, even if you weren't involved in politics, just hearing him tell about things. One of his favorite sayings, and it usually was in reference to conservative Republican office holder or candidate, was to say, totally out to lunch between the ears.
Oh, okay.
And I'll tell you a little bit later why he said about me. So we decided we're going to start a newspaper, compete with Frosty
That's those
Troy.
3 other guys, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the features of his newspaper, of course, he always promoted the liberal Democrats and ran down the conservative Republicans. We now call it fake news. Mm-hmm. He dealt a lot in fake news.
Yes.
But one of the things that he did that everybody every year paid attention to was his best and worst legislators list. Now, this was not done on an objective basis. It was who he liked and disliked. And so the best legislators were liberal Democrats, and the worst ones were the conservative Republicans. But this was used in campaigns, and to a large degree, the ones he selected each year, was based upon if a Democrat was in trouble for re-election, being challenged by a conservative Republican, they would make his best legislator list so that they could say, I was named one of the best legislators by the Oklahoma Observer newspaper, and vice versa. If they were thought they might be able to defeat a Republican, he'd be on the worst legislator list, so the challenger could claim that I'm running against one of the people that's been named one of the worst legislators by the
Ron, that seems like how most media works today.
Yeah.
You're experiencing that way back when.
So,
By the way, before we carry on the comments field, if you're a subscriber or have read the Oklahoma Constitution newspaper, if you're familiar with this publication, please do reach out and make a comment to that effect. We'd really like to know.
Okay. We decided to start a newspaper, and the newspaper needed a name. And so we decided we would write down all the names we heard the newspaper was called, like Times or News or Register or various names. I contributed the name of Constitution. I had heard of the Atlanta Constitution. Mm-hmm. And after we exhausted our list of possible names, then we started putting Oklahoma in front of each one. Yeah. And as we went through the list, when we got to the Oklahoma Constitution, we stopped right there and we said, that's a perfect name. It has a conservative connotation,
Sure.
representing the Constitution, the values and so on.
Ron, can I stop you just a second?
Okay.
Atlanta is the Atlanta Constitution and Journal, I believe, isn't it?
I think back then it might have just been Constitution, and they probably merged, and that's where the Journal.
And so in more recent years, it's referred to as the Atlanta constipation and urine.
Yeah, like so many, it's just like in Oklahoma. The Oklahoman used to be
A conservative newspaper.
Nowadays, it's associated with USA Today.
That's right.
And has a very liberal slant.
Yes, it does.
And so once we came up with the name, the one feature we wanted to do that countered Frosty's best and worst legislators was to do an objective rating of the legislators. So it wasn't just who we liked and disliked, but was based on something. So we decided that we would pick 10 bills each year that best represented the difference in philosophy of the conservatives and liberals in the legislature. And we did 10 just to keep the math simple.
Yep.
And so if you voted, if a legislator voted for the conservative side, which may be for a bill or against a bill,
Right.
depending on what the bill was, they would be awarded 10 points, and they get 0 points if they cast the liberal vote. And so those that rated the highest each year would be named to our top conservatives list, and those at the bottom would be our top liberals list. And so
You also, if they don't vote at all on that issue, you give them 3 points.
yeah, and we did that because we thought there should be a difference between not casting a vote. Either we're a lot of times they're not legitimately absent. They hit the door and decide not to vote.
Yeah.
But we thought there should be a difference in not voting versus also getting 0 if you cast a liberal vote. But we didn't want to give like 5 points, because they could get maybe a halfway respectable score. If they missed all the votes, they get a 50% conservative rating.
Oh, that's halfway respectable?
Well, halfway, yeah. And so we decided 30, by giving 3 points, if they missed a couple of votes, it didn't ding their score too much. And so, but, we wanted to have that difference, from the, a true liberal voting record. So, this was November when we came up with the idea, and we decided that we should have our first edition come out at the Republican State Convention, which would be in February of '79. And so, now by the time that rolled around, 2 of our 4 founders had left the effort. In fact, they actually left the state. And so it was down to just 2 of us, and we distributed our first newspaper edition at the Republican State Convention. We decided that was a good location where there'd be a gathering of political conservatives, and that is actually where I met Charlie Meadows for the first time when we were distributing that newspaper, and then he would become one of our regular writers.
So would that have been 1979?
Yeah, February 1979.
Yeah.
And
Well, Charlie, what did you think of the paper at that time?
Well, I'm not sure that you gave us the conservative index at that
well,
time. I
that
don't
summer,
remember. Was
in that summer,
one of-
yeah. So
okay.
this was our first edition.
Yeah.
It would be a few past there when we did.
Well,
the
I thought it was very
conservative
valuable. I thought it was absolutely vital. And I can tell you this, that there was a lady moved here from New Jersey named Holly Gerard, and she lives down in the Duncan area, the Durant area of the state. And her Democrat state senator was really very liberal, but he would go home and tell them how conservative he was. and I handed her the newspaper, plus I used to rank them. I'd take the scores and I'd rank them most conservative to least.
Sure.
And I'd compare Democrats with, we had some liberal Republicans that scored lower than some of the conservative Democrats. back when there were some conservative Democrats. There aren't any longer in Oklahoma. I'm sorry, not in elected office. They're all 7 of them. There were, never mind. All of them are radical Bernie Sanders revolutionaries.
Yeah, but if I'm right, here's part of the challenge that we face. That was probably during a time period, in order to get elected, you had to run as a Democrat, even if you had more conservative leanings.
Absolutely.
So it makes sense during that time, some of their scores would be higher.
Well, it made her so mad. She went out and she helped Josh Burkeen run for the state senate and beat that guy. And it was a result of seeing this paper. And today, she's one of the few consultants that's not a whore. And I'll explain that by saying many of the consultants are in it for the money. They don't care what you stand for. They're in it for the money. And Holly is a very serious Christian. She won't even run your campaign, even if you claim to be a Christian, if there isn't some evidence of it. And she prays about it and things like that. And she has a pretty good record, you know. But anyway, that's how effective that is. And plus, I mentioned, I think in the program Monday, I mentioned Molly Jenkins. Well, the incumbent she ran against was the president of the Fellowship of Christian Athletes in Stillwater. Mm-hmm. And I used to, he was so liberal his first year, he scored a 20 on the conservative index.
Wow.
Lowest in the entire Republican delegation and lower than some of the Democrats back then. And so I used to tell people he might have enough Christianity to lead someone to the Lord. Maybe he does. But as far as understanding biblical principles and how they translate into good public policy, he didn't have a clue. And so glad that he's gone. I'm sorry, Ron.
Okay.
Well, I won't ask Aya's opinion on the first edition of the Oklahoma newspaper, Constitution newspaper, because she wasn't even born in '79. So had a lot of catching up to do. She did.
Have you saved copies of all of those, Ron?
Well, our very,
There it is.
back then, this was the Oklahoma Observer, and notice the masthead there. Mm-hmm. And to show that we were going to be directly opposite of him, this was our first edition, and we made the masthead look nearly identical. To show that we're the alternative to the Frosty Troy and the Oklahoma Observer. And before our first edition came out, I saw Frosty at the Capitol, and I said, "I'm going into competition with you." And
what did he say?
He said, bring me a copy. I'll be curious to see it.
That he was.
Yeah, and in our first edition, we made a number of swipes at Frosty, pointed out incorrect things that he had published, and in fact, we summed it up by saying we apologize for mentioning Frosty Troy so often, but please be aware that this entire publication could be filled with correcting all of the inaccuracies. And so Frosty he didn't cover the Republican State Convention, but other members of the Capitol Press Corps, were there.
Sure.
And apparently they brought a copy back to the Capitol Press Room that next week and showed to Frosty. And so I had started a full-time job that very month that the first newspaper came out. Mm-hmm. And so I wasn't available during the day to do, go pass the newspapers out at the Capitol, for example, but Clyde Rollins was my remaining partner of the 4 of us that founded it, and he worked as a machinist the night shift at Kimray, and Kimray is still one of our advertisers to this day, and so he was available to go pass out newspapers at the Capitol, for example, in the daytime, do other things for the newspaper. And so I told him, when you're passing out newspapers, be sure to go to the Capitol Press Room. In the Capitol Press Room, there's very few reporters covering the Capitol nowadays. Of course, there's fewer newspapers.
Yes.
But just about every major newspaper in the state had a Capitol reporter. And the press room was a room with a bunch of desks. They didn't even have dividers between the desks. And so like Frosty had a desk there. And when I ran for office the first time and made my announcement, I dropped off copies at the Capitol press room. That was the way you did things, back in those days. So I said, be sure to find Frosty and give him a copy of the newspaper. And so later that day, after Clyde returned from the Capitol, I said, well, did you find Frosty and did you give him a copy of the newspaper? And he said, well, I tried to. And he said he didn't want one. Uh-oh. And of course, he had already seen a copy.
He already saw it.
And Clyde said, but Ron said you wanted a copy. And Frosty replied, Ron McWhorter as living proof that all squirrels don't live in trees. And I said, what does that mean? He said, well, I wondered the same thing. And I asked him, and he said something about gathering nuts. And eventually Frosty, we'd go back and forth in our publications, and Frosty usually referred to us as a newsletter put out by some college kids.
Yeah.
And then eventually he stopped mentioning us at all. But
We eventually lost even your last partner too, didn't you?
well, and so Clyde actually left. I guess it was probably during that first year.
Yeah.
And he left the state. He went to Texas to a Bible school, and he would eventually be a missionary in the Philippines. But before he left, he brought Steve Bias in to help out with the newspaper. And so since then, it's just been Steve Bias and I doing the newspaper all these years.
Well, I had a couple of questions. Well, I had three. One is, how many subscribers do you have right now?
Well, and subscribers are a difficult thing. Now we mail out 700 copies each edition. A lot of them are just people names that we acquired over the years, and people that should be reading it, and we want to influence. And so the actual number of subscribers is less than that.
Sure.
And then especially in recent years, it's difficult. People will subscribe and then they don't renew. Right? And so main publications are going under because they're having a problem.
And the online.
People don't.
We have online.
People do things online, and we have. We put a lot of our articles on our website, which is www.oklahomaconstitution.com, and if you want to subscribe and get our printed copy, and this is what it looks like, today.
And that's what I was going to ask you is how to subscribe. So thank you for that.
So the information, the address to send it to, is there. And
Let me say something here too. Ron and Steve are the worst promoters for their paper I've ever seen in my life, okay? And one of the things, Ron will go to meetings and hand the papers out free.
For free, right.
Well, if you give them away for free, people they just, I'll wait till the next one comes out.
And just to interject, like we send like 710 copies, I think, is what we send out of this current edition.
Yeah.
But we usually print 1,500 to 2,000, and so we give them out. Our purpose.
All lawmakers get one.
I go to each office at the legislature, and so every legislator gets a copy, whether or not it gets past their legislative assistant, onto their desk. I don't know, but
here's another issue too, and I've been on Ron about this just recently. I've been a newspaper junkie. I used to take 5. I'm down to 2 now, because the Oklahoman went to $45 a month for that sorry rag. Or if you pay a year.
Tell us how you really feel, Charlie.
Yeah, just in case, it's just my opinion. Or if you pay a year in advance, it's $440.
Oh, big
okay?
discount there.
Now, they charge $23 to do their online thing.
Yeah.
This is what Ron needs to do. They need to start charging, you know, they're right now it's $20 a year.
Yeah.
And so you need to charge 15 or something like that if they're gonna do it online. And then maybe you wouldn't have to go to the exorbitant, you just increase the price by
Yeah.
$5.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have
Yeah,
to do
yeah.
that, you
Of course,
know.
now our last price
But you make
increase
a lot of money
It
on
was 13 years in between
Yeah.
price increases, and so we just went to $20, you know, with this current
I believe
edition.
I remember it was $6 a year, wasn't it, at
Well,
one time?
it started out, of course, you know, I was showing the copy. The
Before I was
Observer
born.
was $1 if you bought it at a newsstand,
Okay.
you know, per copy.
And it's something I'd like to say about that is something we talked about in our show on Monday, is that, again, Oklahoma is the banner state for conservatism. And so this paper is not good just for Oklahomans. These are things that you guys can read in your states and start using some of these ideas or some of this knowledge to make a difference in your state.
They don't have anything like this in any other state. I can't tell you how many people have asked us how we do what we do in Oklahoma. And I tell them the Oklahoma Constitution is an integral part. They don't have anything, and I've urged people to start it, but they don't, because you guys, I mean, you get rich on this, don't you?
And so because we were losing money,
Yeah.
is why we finally had to do a you know, price increase. And
It's a lot of work,
Yeah.
and they've done this since 1979.
Yes.
And particularly in recent years, you know, newspapers have gone under. In fact, our printer, you know, we're printed in Lindsay, Oklahoma, and they're one of the few remaining, you know, independent printers nowadays. Yeah, it's, you know, printing, everything involved in printing has gone up. But postage, and so when we mail out those copies, it has about twice a year in recent years, postage has gone up, and they've particularly shifted a lot of that burden, you know, to the commercial mailers. And so, you know, our cost, you know, half of our, you know, cost is postage. And I say in the printing had gone up as well, but not as much as the postage. Online, you have hardly any expense.
Right.
And so you know, truthfully, if we did away with the printed you know, version,
Your passion's about getting the information
so
out,
we
you
want to
know.
get the information out. So I don't know that we would even, you know, charge, you know, if we went strictly to online. We want to get that information out.
Yeah, the challenge is getting the information out. But did you have two more questions, Ira?
I do have
I'd
another
like
one.
to speak to that in a moment.
And it wasn't necessarily about the, you know, distribution, but you mentioned people who didn't cast votes, and you figured that into your score. And
Legislators that don't.
yes,
cast votes,
yes.
yeah.
And a question I had about that is, I drive by the Capitol a lot. So, like we said, from June to November-ish, the parking lot is empty for the legislators, and I guess that's okay. The other day I was told.
And even their staff is reduced in the, you know, off season. When I pass out the newspaper in the summer and fall, when they're not in set, now that they have interim study committees and some things going on, so
Yeah.
some of the legislators will be there. But a lot of, you know, on a lot of the doors when I'd be passing out the newspaper, it would say, see, you know, so and so in office, you know, so that, you know, they have more of a skeleton staff. You know, so some of them, the legislative assistants, they're called, just work during the session and take the rest of the year off. And those that are around, you know, there's not that, you know, much activity at the Capitol and all.
Yeah, so I had a legislator tell me the other day that, you know, since it was Thursday, they were trying to hurry and wrap up the meetings around 10 or 10:30.
Yeah, they're just there Monday through Thursday normally.
Okay.
And so like when I pass out the newspapers, I gotta be there, you know, Monday through Thursday. Can't do it on Friday.
And so
Right.
then I know of a particular legislator right now who has drawn an opponent because he missed, I think it's somewhere around 1,000 votes. And so,
Stinson, maybe?
no, it's another
Okay.
one.
Okay.
So my question is, do you know what the average number of votes are per session? And, you know, the general public never really hears about, you know, my senator or my representative wasn't there for half of the votes, and you're including that in your score. So can you speak a little more on that?
Of course, we target 10 bills, and the truth is, the majority of the bills you can't identify as that's conservative versus liberal.
Okay.
A lot of them are just housekeeping measures that fix problems with laws.
Cleanup bills,
and so on.
as they'll call it, cleanup
yes.
bills.
And so there are thousands of votes, and if say someone is sick or for some reason they can't be there, and particularly at the end of the session when a lot more votes are happening on the floor of there'll be committees and so on, just like now meeting, but there's not that many votes occurring on the actual House and Senate floor right now. You get to the end of the session and you may have 100 votes in a day, and if a legislator misses one of those days, it can really count up on when you just look at the absences.
Another thing too, if I'm not mistaken, Ron, those that make the index are on final vote. They're not procedural votes. Many times a bill will be voted on multiple times as it goes through the process, sometimes being reformed. Sometimes people will vote for a bill to see if it can be improved, and then vote against it if it wasn't improved or something of that nature. Give the author an opportunity to make it better. And but your votes are the ones that's the final vote.
Yeah, and we do
so
that.
They don't do any
we do that
procedural
because many times they'll say, well, I was for the bill before I was against it, because as one presidential candidate said that
and
one
and
time.
they like to only have, I think, on the index a bill. I mean, the one that makes it on the index was voted on both in the Senate and the House.
Yeah,
So
occasionally, if we can find two bills, it's a game that they play where a House member will author a bill and a Senate member the same bill.
Sure.
Different bill, not Senate bill and a House bill number, and neither one of them, one may get a vote in the House and one may get a vote in the Senate, but the same bill doesn't get votes in both houses, and so it never
They
becomes
do that?
law. Yeah.
Do they do this, Ron?
So sometimes we will pair bills.
Yeah.
If it's essentially the same bill, and they're almost identical language. You have a House and a Senate bill, so we'll pair those or very similar bills. But generally, we like it to be the same bill voted on in that final vote in both chambers of the legislature, because when we have used different votes, we have said, well, I would have got a higher score if you rated me the same as the other chamber. So that to defend against that, we try to, as much as possible, keep the same bill.
Ron, I've got a question for you, and you'll know where I'm coming from on this. I'm wondering how often it is that if you have a legislator who's got an established voting record, and it says one thing, but when they go back to their district and they're campaigning for re-election, they actually they speak in different terms. And it's clear maybe they're a little more liberal when they vote, and they're more conservative when they speak to their audience. Or their constituents, have you experienced that? Can you address that?
Well, there are, because conservatism is more popular now, everybody claims to be a Trump Republican.
Yes.
But, and I've even been taken in by that. Some of these candidates that recently announced, and I maybe was familiar with like one particular bill that that I knew about that was a conservative bill that they were the author of. And so, I initially had, well, I'm great, great, we got, a candidate that looks like they're a conservative. And then I pull out and this is our last summer edition, where we rated the legislators. And then, and this actually happened to me a few weeks ago. A candidate announced, and I thought, well, that's good. And then I opened it up, and their score was in the 60s.
Which is low for our audience.
Yeah. We like to see candidates, our top conservative list is typically those that score 80% or higher. And so when you see somebody claiming that they're the conservative candidate in this field of half dozen candidates that have announced.
Yes, Ron,
and you see that they have a 60% conservative, right?
I can do the same thing for our audience benefit, just so you know. I get the print copy, and I do read it because I just like to read the print. But on the other hand, there's been plenty of times when candidates go around, it's the right season, so they show up at the various meetings and they begin to speak, and I'm pulling out my phone. All right, and I go right to the Constitution newspaper and look up their score, and that says a great deal.
And by the way, we have the scores dating back, I think, at least 10 years, maybe.
Sure.
And so you can see year by year what they scored, and so and I've done that at times, where I didn't, have a copy of our summer edition with the latest ratings. I've gone online and looked up their score.
That's right. It's so convenient to be in a meeting, look online and to see it. And hey, Ron, I got a question for you again. I know I'm jumping in. When you approach a legislator and their score is, let's say their cumulative is something like 76 or something like that, or maybe even lower, right?
And that's something to mention about cumulative rating. Each year, we give what their score is on the 10 bills that we rated them on this year. But then we keep a running average for all the time they've been in. So if they've been there 12 years, which is the limit now, with term limits, before, we would have, ones that have been rated, 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
But now 12
Yes.
years is the maximum number.
Yeah.
And we carry those on. If they were a House member and then they were elected to the Senate, we carry their score over, a record in the House. And so the cumulative average is their average score for all the years that they've been rated, which is very telling because maybe now they're worried about re-election. So this year they watched a little better and they got a little better score. But then you can look at their average and see, well, for the last 12 years, here's how they've been voting.
If their average happens to be something like 65 or 70, and then you go talk to them about it, what kind of a response do you get? What kind of apologies do you hear for that?
Well, they try to, often they'll say, well, I voted, the way the people in my district wanted me to vote, rather than, following the principle. But
Do you ever ask them, how do you know?
Yeah.
Did you send a survey? Did you send a survey out to them?
Yeah.
Or did the survey only get to the lobbyists?
So that's just their excuse, for it. But,
Well, to your compliment.
And sometimes, I've had legislators say, well, I liked my score, but I didn't realize that I had voted that way.
Well, I'll tell you, I want to give you a compliment. There's one thing I've never run into in this state. When I ask a legislator, they all know their score. They all know their score. They're reading it. They're tracking what you
And
put out.
comparing with each other. I've heard this. When they come up, well, what score did you get?
I've got to tell a funny story here. So Oak Pack used to have, we had awards for your outstanding lawmakers. And then we had an award for the Rhino of the Year in both the House and the Senate, and the runner-up. And one year, a state rep out of Stillwater got the Rhino of the Year award. And the press was at our meeting that day. And boy, it made big news, and it created Hades for that fella up there. Well, the next year, he wins again. And we had a trophy, a nice trophy. And it was a picture of a donkey with elephant ears over his ears and something, a snoot on the end of it, but it was a donkey. And so I had this nice trophy, and I left the meeting, and I went up to his office to give it to him. And I walk in, and his legislative assistant, he's in Stillwater that day, and his LA is on the phone with him. And she said, "You're not going to believe who walked through the door. It's Charlie Meadows, and he has another trophy for you." And said, "Do you want to speak with him?" I said, "Sure." And so I get on the phone. I said, "Representative, whatever his name was," I said, "You have won the Rhino of the Year award again." And he said, "I'll tell you what, you can take that award and shove it up to where the sun does." I said, "Well, Representative so-and-so, I'm just going to leave it here on your desk, and you do with it what you want to, you know." But anyway, so we used to, OPAC unfortunately doesn't do any of that anymore.
Charlie's Picks.
Yes,
Is
yes.
that familiar?
Yeah.
Yes.
This is another thing, too, that has endeared me to a lot of people is over the years, I've done so much vetting and so much research and everything that before your major elections, primary, runoff, and general, I will put out a list called Charlie's Picks. And it's my recommendation. It's kind of like a racetrack tip sheet, but rather than pick who's going to win, I tell who should win, and I express why. And, at the peak, we had 5,000 people on our email list, and God only knows how far that gets forwarded. And the first time we had a website on a primary election, we had 15,000 people log into that. But I became known all over the state for my Charlie's Picks. But so much of it is based upon the Constitution. And one funny story here, I don't like to wear a seatbelt. And so this would have been about 2017, 2018. I was coming back home. I was washing windows in Yukon, and I came over the bridge at Lake Overholser, and I saw a highway patrolman behind me. And I figured I was going to get stopped as soon as I got off the bridge. And sure enough, he pulls up, comes up, he's on that side over there, and wants to see my license and insurance. And I said, "Well, my insurance is over there in the glove compartment." He said, "That's right, I'll look it up." So he goes back, and pretty soon he comes back, and he's got a ticket for me. And he asked me, I'm always very respectful. He asked me, "Why don't you wear your seatbelt?" Well, I start my liberty speech. And he says, "Wait just a minute." He said, "What is your name again?" He hadn't really paid any attention to it. I said, "Charlie Meadows." He said, "Are you the one that does the Charlie's Picks?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Man, I'll tell you what, I share that with all the guys in our patrol troop and everything." And he says, "My brother, who is also a highway patrolman, is the one that turned me on to you. And when he finds out I've written you a ticket, he's going to kick my butt." But they do. They have distribution all over the state of Oklahoma, and that I kind of got to be known for that. And when I ran for county commissioner, I had 25 people in the district that knew me through Charlie's Picks that identified themselves that supported me because of that. And so, but anyway.
Well, for our audience benefit, you can see Ron here speak about the idea of circulation, and on a volunteer basis, trying to get out and reach everybody has its challenges, and yet this information is invaluable. In your county, if you live in Oklahoma, if you could get a copy of this and maybe even provide a subscription to your GOP county chairman so that they can use this and be informed, because not everybody's aware of how their own legislators actually vote. They'll know what they say when they come for a visit, but they won't actually know the voting record. Yeah. And they may not even be aware of this newspaper, regardless of its age, because county chairmen do come and go at time. I encourage you to reach out and to get a copy for them as you subscribe to one for yourself, hopefully.
And that's something that, I mentioned we mail out a lot of copies of people that should be reading it. And we have a list of newspapers across the state. Mm-hmm. And I have to update that because a lot of them have gone out of business or
Sure.
merged and so on. But we send copies to a lot of particularly the rural area newspapers, so that they can be informed about how their local legislator votes.
Sure.
Because a lot of them, since there's no longer many that have capital reporters, feeding information back to them, they need to know how their local legislator rates among the other legislators.
Right, it can be very difficult to get that information otherwise. Even though all that information is available on the oklegislator.gov website, the reality is it's tough to get it in a summary form, select key important legislation, and then scored. And that's the value of your paper.
Another thing too, all four of us actually live in Senate District 28. We have a very liberal senator that is coming up for re-election after his first four years in office now. And his opponent sponsored a big event over in Chandler. And three of us went to that event, and I was asked to speak about the Oklahoma Constitution's Conservative Index. So I gave a little history, and I also gave a little information about the credibility of the quality of the newspaper. I'll just say this right now. In 2006, our Senate was tied, 24 Republicans, 24 Democrats. And at the end of the session, the CBS local affiliate here hired a person at a political science professor at the Hoover Institute at Stanford University to evaluate the performance of our legislature that year. And a month later, they came back and they listed about 10 of the most important bills. Well, 8 of those bills were on the Constitution's Conservative Index, and the other 2 we considered but didn't use them. We used something different on that. And so, but anyway, so I gave that history. And then I talked about our senator. His name is Grant Green. And his lifetime average is a 60. We have 40 Republican state senators in Oklahoma out of 48. And there's only 5 Republican senators have a lower score than that 60 than Grant Green. So pointed out that he's one of the most liberal Republicans there. And again, using the Constitution's Conservative Index to do that. And,
So I've been writing for a paper for going on 8 years. Now my dog writes a lot more. He has a weekly article and he's extremely popular. But having done that, my question for you is, you're getting ready to hit your 50th anniversary. So one of the things I'm curious about is what keeps you going, because I know that's not easy to do, to come up with all of that content. And then does your paper, what goals do you have, or do you have a mission statement? What pushes you for almost 50 years now to keep doing this thing that's not easy to do and not always as recognized as it should be?
Just under our masthead, we have Oklahoma's conservative voice since 1979. And so that's what we try to be, the voice of conservatives.
Tell us about Steve a little bit, your partner. You picked him up after the first year. I heard him speak one time, the guy that talked to him and said, "You need to meet Ron." It was pretty hilarious. Steve can be very funny.
Yeah.
You remember? He said, "You got to meet this guy. He drives an electric vehicle. He's a vegetarian." I don't know what all that deal was.
I am a vegetarian. But,
It was hilarious. But Steve's been your partner for a long time. Steve thought, can this guy possibly be a conservative and a vegetarian and 2 or 3 other things,
When Clyde Rollins brought Steve in, they have both been active. We were all college age, and they had been active in organizing students, conservative students, on the 2 campuses that they were, and so that's and they shared what they were doing on their campus versus, the two of them. And so that's how, Clyde was, acquainted with Steve.
A teacher.
And so Steve,
history teacher.
Yeah, he was a history teacher, and
now he's a professor.
He retired, from public,
Schools.
teaching, like high school, and I think high school and middle school history and government over the years.
Right.
And so now he works for Randall University in Moore, Oklahoma.
Right.
And he runs their
And
history
he's
program.
authored several books.
Yeah. He's an author, and so, now he's done both novels, but he's done books about history.
Right.
One has to do with I don't remember exactly, something like History's Greatest Myths. Things that you've heard about, like George Washington or different characters, and what the truth of it is. So he's very much, and he does in addition to his column in the newspaper, and I do a column. Charlie does a column.
Yeah. You're
He-
more the managing editor.
I'm the general manager.
Yeah, general manager.
But Steve also does a column on Oklahoma history,
Right.
things that you didn't know about history in Oklahoma, particularly a lot of times about Oklahoma governors, and comparing that to situations today. And so that's
We've had a
that's
lot
what
of colorful governors in Oklahoma.
Yeah,
No
yeah.
doubt about it.
Colorful.
Yes. I think one married his a daughter or something.
No, I don't remember that one.
A relative of some level.
So I have a
I'll drink to
question. I'm assuming that you've had articles about legislators specifically. When this happens, if they're not complimentary articles, do they reach out to you? How does that go?
Yeah, how many of them try to set you straight, Ron?
Well, probably the most memorable thing was, and he became known as a result of what we wrote about him. It was the taxman Lewis. I forget now what his first name was, but he was the author of a bill that. Well, one of our readers put us onto it. You got to read this bill that's going through the legislature, and they're going to make you on property taxes list all your, how many TVs you have, all your possessions.
Civil War clothing.
Yeah,
Yep.
and people, and so we read the bill. It actually said all that in there. And so we published an article about it, and Steve Lewis, I think.
Yeah, I think I was.
And so he became known as Steve the Taxman Lewis as a result of this. And now one error that we did make, while this was in the bill, it was actually in existing law.
Speaker of the House?
Well, it was, they were just carrying over the language from the existing law. And his defense on the deal was, that's not some new stuff he put into his bill. That was existing law. But he said nobody, does that. And so when I interviewed him, about that, because he had complained and said, well, you got this wrong because, my bill's not doing this. That was already in the law. We were just making some other changes, to it. And so I said, well, if it's no longer in the law and not being done, then why, have it in there? But then we found out in Logan County, which by that time I had moved to Logan County, I got a thing to list your property.
Yeah.
And Logan County was one of the few counties that actually gave you the alternative. They either a percentage of the value of your home, or you could list your actual property. See how many TVs and so on you had. So we put that in our next article.
I sort of warned the assessors, don't think you're going to walk into my house to count things. That's not going to go.
So we showed the Logan County Tax Forum where you list all this stuff and how he said that nobody actually does this.
Yeah.
And so, they ended up taking out,
Yeah.
and then he ran, I believe, for Congress.
He
And
did.
then that's where we're in the campaign.
He was the Shawnee area, wasn't he? I think?
Well,
Yeah, it seems
That
like.
doesn't matter.
And
Go
so his opponent nicknamed him Steve the Taxman Lewis because of this.
Reputation's titled.
And one time when I talked to him, first time I talked to him, we went to, discuss, what I just talked about. He said, "You have caused me a lot of grief."
Yeah.
And so, so they do pay attention.
I know
to
we
it.
don't
They
have
do, don't they? Yeah.
I know we don't have a lot of time, but I wrote an article one time, and it was titled, "Will the real J.C. Watts please stand up?" It was based on that TV program. And I supported J.C. getting elected to Congress, and then he turned out to be quite liberal. And so I was just trying to expose that. And I normally get my articles in on time.
Charlie's usually about the last one.
But anyway, Steve had, he had just, I don't know if he had changed churches or JC had, but that article came out before Steve could look at it. And I don't know if you remember that or not, and they were in the same Sunday school class or something to that nature, and it proved to be very embarrassing. I think Steve says, "I want to make sure I read Charlie's articles every time before they're published." So, but they've never tried to control me at all on my articles. They give me total freedom on that, and so I appreciate that.
Usually they're fixing grammar and different things.
Yeah, you got a lot of that.
so this is
I'm a
a
victim of our
quarterly
government schools.
paper.
Yeah.
What months does it come out?
Generally, our winter edition, which is what the one that just came out a few weeks ago, it comes out about the end of January, and then 3 months later, the end of April, and then our summer edition with the conservative ratings, it's at the end of July, and then there's a little more flexibility when it comes to the fall edition, especially in election years. It comes out at normally the end of October, but because depending on when the November election is, sometimes we have to move that up a week or two so that people can get it in time. We know how we had an episode one year when the Postal Service was extremely slow. And it took over a week, to arrive, and we had got comments from people that it was a great issue. It'd been nice if I had it before the election. And so we had to start, moving it up to make sure that people get it in time for the election.
All right, we're kind of close on the clock. 30, 45-second comment to close with that?
Yeah, I just want to encourage everyone to subscribe, whether you're in Oklahoma or not. It can be a great asset to what you know about politics.
And we do have subscribers out of the state that want to keep up, with what's happening here.
My thought to close with, it's been my observation that many times the bills that are on the index point towards the idea of liberty, and yet our legislators are moved to vote for what paying lobbyists want to contribute to campaigns, which can contradict liberty because they have their own special interest in mind. This paper is how we can hold our legislators accountable, because one thing they have to do is get reelected. It's a great resource for that. Charlie?
Yeah, I'd like to say, particularly when Jason Murphy was a state legislator, when they'd be debating on bills on the floor, Jason would oftentimes say, "This is likely to be an index vote." And when he'd say that, you'd have anywhere from 10 to 15 might switch their position. They did not want to be on the wrong side of being an index vote. So,
And we should mention that Jason Murphy, the 12 years he was our representative, scored 100% every
lifetime
year.
average, the only one that's ever done that.
The only one that came
consistent.
close was Bill Graves. Who,
But he was there for 26 years at 99%.
Yeah.
So,
And he had he was absent for a vote. That's why he didn't have 100%.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So,
All right, we're there.
yeah. See you folks next Monday. I believe that'll be the 2nd of March, if I'm not mistaken. Talk to you later.
See you then.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Ron, thank you very much for coming
Good.
around.
Yeah, I
That went
appreciate it.
fast.
Yeah, they do.